Thank you very much for coming to the Polish Economic Institute. I would like to thank you for coming. Thank you for our online listeners on our streaming website. And with no further ado, I would like to ask Deputy Director of the Polish Economic Institute and former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Konrad Szymański, to take the floor to welcome.
Thank you. I have a feeling that we have a quite strong competition in both physical and online today. It isn't planned. We wouldn't be brave enough to start such a risky competition. But let me add a couple of words at the very beginning of this meeting. My name is Konrad Szymański. I'm a Deputy Director for Polish Economic Institute. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone, both physically present here in the premises of the Institute and also online, our guests online. This is the premiere presentation of the report, Stronger Together, Present and Future Challenges on Ukraine's Road to EU Integration. This is not the first report on Ukraine made by Polish Economic Institute, but this report is prepared by Polish Economic Institute and Center for Economic Strategies from Kiev. I think it is a very significant aspect of this publication. Let me first welcome our Ukrainian colleagues and partners. Gleb Wyszynski, Executive Director of Center for Economic Strategies in Kiev, Jana Okremenko in Warsaw, and Maria Repko, another co-author of the report. We will start with presentation and then panel debate, together with Marek Wąsiński, already well known to you, a principal co-author of the report, and also Anna Jarosz-Fries from European Commission, Acting Director of Ukrainian Service of Directorate General for Neighborhood Policy, I think person number one in executive preparation of everything what already happened in this tremendously important process. And let me say a couple of words about the report itself. We present three different perspectives. First of all, short-term economic assistance. It's a kind of resume, but also a presentation of the needs we have, quite urgent needs, as we know. Medium-term perspective is mainly about improvements in physical infrastructure, and long-term economic and political integration of Ukraine with European Union. Having in mind enormous costs of reconstruction, we already made at least preliminary reports about this significant aspect. The enlargement itself is fundamental for unprecedented activization of private funds. The legal and economic certainty, which is a core, a very nature of accession process, is a precondition for a successful reconstruction of Ukraine. Not less important than strong foundations of just peace in Ukraine. Ukrainian accession is important for Ukraine, but also important for Europe. It represents our European, especially Polish, strategic interests. This long-term paradigm of Polish politics doesn't mean that any model of accession is right and beneficial. We need fair sharing of burden and fair sharing of benefits and opportunities offered by every accession to the EU. With this report in hand, we want to open a transparent debate, also about all sorts of modalities of the process. It is easy to assess costs of accession using, by the way, a historically present allocation method. For services of EU Council, it is 186 billion euro, significant amount of money. For German Institute for Economic Research, it is up to 17% of EU budget, which is more or less the same sum of money. But this is fundamentally incomplete perspective. We shouldn't start this debate with costs-only perspective. Ukraine market represents also opportunities, and responsible debate should start with costs and benefits data. It is another argument, by the way, to strengthen EU budget. We cannot do more and more with the same or even less money. Another obstacle to be solved concerns EU itself. We don't address institutional affairs here, of course. It's an autonomous, quite different topic, but somehow linked, or at least we can observe efforts to link this issue with the accession and enlargement process. Let me quote Ursula von der Leyen here, to make it short. During the State of the Union address, 13th of September in Strasbourg, she presented a common sense approach to this matter. We cannot and we should not wait for treaty change to move ahead with enlargement, she said. A union fit for enlargement can be achieved faster, end of the quote. EU accession shouldn't be held hostage by our internal problems. Polish Economic Institute already presented reports on reconstruction. Today we want to publish reports on accession, but many things wait for proper analysis. With this set of observations made by me, let me start our debate, and I would like to pass the floor, first of all, to Chleb Wyszliński, Executive Director of the Center for Economic Strategies, and then I will ask authors and our co-panelists to make comments and observations after the presentation of the report. Thank you very much. Chleb, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Konrad. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for proposing this cooperation in producing a joint report on opportunities and challenges in EU integration for Ukraine and implications for cooperation between Ukraine and Poland. We started working on this report, and we are publishing it in a very challenging time, both in terms of bilateral relations, economic relations between Ukraine and Poland, change of the government in Poland, and very significant decisions that should be made this week on the EU Council meeting in Brussels. Our opinion is that, as you said, Konrad, we need to be very rational in our decisions made in the process of integration of Ukraine to the single market. We believe that, in fact, despite prevailing opinions that Ukraine and our Western neighbors, including Poland, are our natural competitors. In fact, we are supplementing each other on different markets. We could be perfect links in the joint value chain that will include both Ukrainian, Polish, and maybe even other EU members to produce goods and services that will be more competitive on the global market, as we believe that global market forces will still be the most important and competitiveness on the global market will be the most important factors in sustainable and long-term economic growth for both Ukraine and for Poland and our neighbors. So in this week of very important and complicated decisions, I'm happy that my colleague and colleagues from Polish Economic Institute will now present this significant and unique report. Thank you.
thank you very much for these welcoming remarks. And now I will move to a short presentation of the report before we start the discussion panel. And let me thank myself for the cooperation, our Ukrainian colleagues. Thank you very much, Jana, that is here and that will take the floor during the presentation. And thank you very much, Klip, and all other colleagues that we could cooperate on this report. I believe it's there's vast material to study, and I hope that will help the debate of the challenges ahead of Ukraine on the road, on the path to EU accession. So first of all, let me describe that we structured our report in three perspectives. Short term with, of course, the war effort, but the most important factor here is finance of the state budget, trade issues, as well as short-term reconstruction projects. In medium-term challenges are more investments like in border infrastructure, but also investments in reconstruction of Ukrainian economy. It is about also how to attract foreign direct investments to come to Ukraine, as well as how to help in other ways so economy to stand on its legs. Long-term challenges, here we described the reform processes that are ongoing and that are still to be done, and as well as the challenge of negotiations with the EU and what are here possible scenarios, or actually I would like to maybe stress not scenarios but tools that can be used to somehow decrease the political tensions that are connected to the talks. So moving forward, it's first of all, it's the question of financial needs of Ukraine, and more than $68 billion of foreign financing have been donated to Ukraine since February 24th. It constituted 72% of the needs of Ukrainian budget in 2023. Most of them are loans. Only about 40% were given in grants, and this will be the factor, another challenge for Ukraine, how to pay back this debt. So grants are much better help here for the Ukrainian budget than loans. In 2024, foreign financing needs will reach almost $40 billion. And here we will need to talk also in our debate maybe how EU can help, and there is a big project ongoing with $50 billion at stake, but there is a question mark still ahead of it. Military help is, of course, crucial for Ukraine, and in the report we describe the most generous help received from the US when it comes to this part. However, when we account for percentage, the share in GDP of the total help distributed to Ukraine, here we can see that countries of Central Eastern Europe go ahead, and 10 countries all over the world gave support over half of their GDP. Half of a percent, sorry, of the GDP. When it comes to as a very crucial help, and so meeting humanitarian needs of Ukraine, here the total distributed help went to above 16 billion euro. It was informed, for example, also in support for migrants, and here we can stress also the big effort that was made here in Poland to help coming refugees. There is also a question of big coming costs of demining. And this cost is being accounted to about $40 billion. There is still need to help emergency services to be stronger. When it comes to challenges that are also of political and economic nature, we can speak about trade challenges that are still ongoing and still ahead of us. But also this is a question of how we can increase the capacity also on the border, how we can move into intermodal transport of goods, how to improve the capacity of railway lines, roads, but also to build logistics centers and grain silos on the border. It's still investments that are to be made and efforts to streamline on the border transit. A lot has been done when it comes to, for example, decreasing barriers in customs procedures, in technical barriers to trade. So a lot of good happened, but still a lot of things are to be done. We should stress also the big help of European Union when it comes to full liberalization of trade until 2024 by lifting the tariff rate quotas in bilateral trade. However, here also the trade distortions happened that made it not as easy as we also would like to have. Ukraine's agriculture exports before the war accounted for a third of Ukraine's export, and after the war it was more than a half. So agriculture is a biggest issue when it comes to exports and bilateral trade relations also with neighbors, especially because of the problems with reshuffling the export routes from the Black Sea to European partners. Here, most of us have seen data on increase in imports of wheat and maize, for example. These are politically sensitive categories, and there is a need to find a solution that it will be as of political nature. We can see solutions like, for example, bilateral agreement between Romania and Ukraine that we can look for as the examples what can be done. Still, so it's good to stress the need to increase capacity of the border customs and sanitary controls, so also the stuff that is being needed. In the short-term solutions will be also met by medium-term and long-run solutions when it comes to increasing the capacity of the infrastructure. It's not only about rebuilding Ukrainian rail networks, it's also about the upgrade of the transport networks. It's extending the lines because there is difference in gauge train that is wider in the Ukraine, so we need to extend existing lines going into. To give the floor to Jana, she will speak about further challenges in medium term and long term. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So I guess we proceed to discussing medium-term challenges. And the first one, probably the most crucial, is reconstruction. So even though reconstruction is constantly going on in Ukraine on the current basis, there are several principles which need to be maintained in order to ensure that it's done in a way facilitating economic growth in the long run. So the first one is obviously requirement for transparency and strong anti-corruption orientation. And when it comes to reconstruction, decentralization is crucial in this context. So even though there are some centralized attempts to structure reconstruction process in a proper way, proper management of resources, local management of resources will be crucial. When it comes to something we mentioned in the report, and it's extremely aligned with what was mentioned in the European Commission report in November, is Build Back Better principle. So it's not a secret that in many perspectives, Ukrainian infrastructure was obsolete before the beginning of the full-scale invasion. But actually right now, foreign financing can be used as an opportunity to modernize infrastructure. So again, this is something which is extremely aligned with the opinion of the European Commission. And finally, it's important to define some key areas for reconstruction and some key objectives. So in general, who should help, what should be provided, and what are the conditions of such help. Okay. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that for Ukrainian reconstruction and further economic development, hopefully after the end of the war, private investment will be crucial. Unfortunately, Ukrainian state will probably not have enough capacity for large-scale interventionist policies. In this case, there are several new opportunities which are associated with investing in Ukraine, in particular its defense-related investment. We need to admit that this process started relatively recently, but actually military expenditures in Ukraine increased significantly, and there are many private startups, and there is a lot of potential for private-public partnership. The same thing can be mentioned about EU-related and reconstruction-related investment, but also we need to remember that when it comes to traditional investment, including agriculture and industry, Ukraine remains quite an attractive destination with a relatively strong comparative advantage in these industries. So according to the research which was conducted before the war, high level of corruption and the absence of proper market institutions remains the main obstacles towards inward foreign investment. So although this conclusion might sound trivial, yeah, it's indeed crucial to ensure proper market institutions in order to attract sufficient amount of investment needed for post-war reconstruction of Ukraine. So concerning this, some fiscal incentives might be applied. They are pretty traditional. For instance, they might include lower corporate tax rates for foreign enterprises coming to Ukraine. They might include different kinds of tax reliefs. But actually, I would like to emphasize that in this case, building proper market institutions is even more important. And again, this is extremely aligned with the conclusions provided in the European Commission report in November. And proceeding to the long-term challenges. Okay, so Poland represents an example of quite a successful integration to the European Union, which was pretty beneficial for both sides. I mean, for Poland as a new member and previous European Union members. So regarding this, there are several lessons which might be learned by Ukrainian authorities. And actually, we included them to the section called adaptive learning. So the first one is independent monetary policy. Ideally, it should include inflation targeting by the Ukrainian Central Bank. And although this section was prepared earlier, in the beginning of October, Ukrainian National Bank of Ukraine actually announced switch to the dirty pack, which is one of the stages of preparation to full inflation targeting. Decentralization. So again, as for now, Polish experience is more successful than the one in Ukraine. But judging on what was happening in Poland, probably this should be one of the priorities for Ukrainian policymakers. Public procurement and anti-corruption mechanism. So actually this was already mentioned. So anti-corruption mechanisms are crucial for attracting more of foreign investment and for attracting more of constructive foreign capital, so the one which is expected to facilitate economic growth in the long-run perspective. And according to the European Commission report of November 2023, so far, although some efforts were noticed, they were not sufficient. So perhaps this should be recognized as one of the priorities. And finally, capital market development. So in this case, Poland represents an extremely successful case. As for now, in Ukraine, there is no stock exchange and capital markets are rather underdeveloped. So in our report, we included a pretty extensive analysis regarding, how this can actually be done in the post-transition state. So this should be one of the priorities of Ukraine, which again will be associated with attracting foreign capital, facilitating economic growth, and so on and so forth. So I guess that's it. Thank you. Marek?
Thank you very much, Jana. And to finalize the presentation, the issues of integration with the EU single market are incremental, and we are speaking here about single market because, of course, from the political perspective, the full EU accession is the best possible outcome, but there are challenges ahead, and full EU political integration of Ukraine might not be as easy, and although we hope that it won't be this scenario, but it might fail. So integration with the EU single market will be incremental for Ukraine's economy to develop. And so that's why we present also two possible scenarios of not integration with EU accession. But this is the best possible outcome, and we need to go ahead, tackle challenges like ongoing war and the divisions in Europe that actually we'll see and observe this Thursday and this Friday, what will happen about these divisions. We can try to overcome these challenges by using several tools, several clauses that might give some political security and safety to European partners that seem afraid of the accession. Of course, we are speaking about EU adapting to this accession, but it's a different story as well. And what is so the EU accession is the best possible scenario, and we need to secure it. If not, maybe joining the European Economic Area might be also seeked. It might prove easier, though it will be very risky when it comes, for example, to public sentiment in Ukraine, because it's not what we all want. Third scenario possible is that we stay within the association agreement, or we deepen our bilateral trade ties, but there's no more integration when it comes to accession to this single market. It's of course here the worst scenarios for for the partners. With no further ado, I would like to start our discussion panel. And I would like to invite Jana Okremenko to take the floor, senior economist of the CES that presented as well. Daniel Szeligowski from the Polish, yes, please. Daniel Szeligowski from the Polish Institute of International Affairs, yes, please. Head of Eastern Europe team in PISM, as well as online is joining us Anna Jarosz-Fries, Director of Ukraine Service in European Commission. Thank you very much for joining us. I know that your time is very little, and thank you very much for finding this time to join us. Unfortunately, Edwin Bendyk couldn't make it on time for us to come from Wrocław. So we are only, there's 3 of us only. So thank you very much. And now maybe I will start with Ms. Anna Jarosz-Fries in asking her, with her European perspective, what might happen this week. Sorry.
1 million euro.
Oh, yes,
Hello,
we
can you hear it?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Good afternoon. It's a 50 billion euro question for Ukraine, isn't it? What will happen on Thursday and Friday in Brussels? The Commission has made a very clear recommendation as regards the enlargement track of Ukraine, which you have referenced a lot in referring to the enlargement report that we have adopted in November earlier this year. And the Commission has also made a proposal for Ukraine facility, medium-term financing instrument for Ukraine with the total budget of 50 billion euros for the next 4 years. So this is part of the revision of the multi-annual financial framework, which is a long-term EU budget. And that is part of then the proposal to revise it in order to ask member states to agree to pay fresh money in order to continue financing Ukraine for the next 4 years, as proposed by the Commission. So the best outcome, of course, is that the Commission recommendations are followed and that the Commission proposal is also confirmed in the discussion about the budget and in the discussion about the enlargement. And I think we will all be here in many European capitals, in the US and in particular in Kiev, watching carefully what comes out of the European Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like to comment here, Jana or Daniel, about the coming week, or there's it's still we don't know what will happen, all right? So yes, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks very much for the invitation at the very beginning. I don't want to speculate, but I think it's not a genuine question on behalf of Hungary. So I'm not sure if this would make you feel at least a bit more relaxed. So it isn't in the case of North Macedonia and Greece. So it's not really the case of the Hungarian national minority, because from the Hungarian perspective, from the perspective of the Hungarian national minority, definitely the positive move, the positive outcome would be to open the negotiations, because if there is a clear perspective to secure the rights of the national minorities, it is the EU membership for Ukraine. So I think it's definitely not this case. It is likely bargaining for the money with the Commission. I hope so it is, which means that likely it would be bit easier to overcome this Hungarian veto. I mean, you like it or not, there's going to be some trade-off with the Hungarians. Maybe not now, we will see. But hopefully it won't take us as much time as the case with Macedonia and Greece. But I don't want to speculate. Just
yeah, of course. So now maybe when we are speaking about the accession road for Ukraine. So another question to all of you. Maybe let's start with Jana now in the different order. So what are the main challenges on the accession road for Ukraine that you see from your perspective? So we spoke in the report, but if you are to name one, for example.
I'm afraid this is a very complicated question. Yeah, also like there is a lot of speculation involved here. So from economic standpoint, like definitely not all the accession criteria have been fulfilled so far. And it's really clear that there is a substantial gap, you know, when it comes to income, wages, and that's why there is a really like considerable risk of potential economic shocks for Ukraine and the European Union. So perhaps like this is the main thing. And when it comes to politics, yeah, I'm afraid this is just, you know, too much of speculation at this point, like we will see.
Yes, thank you. Daniel?
So we're gonna have a very peculiar blame game between the United States and the European Union. I just came from Washington, and I heard it clearly from American colleagues. So there is the discussion on what should come first, EU membership or NATO membership. Our American colleagues say, oh, well, NATO membership is not on the table, so you take Ukraine to the European Union pretty quickly, and it's done, then it's nice. It's not. After the fall of the Soviet Union, if you remember, no country joined the European Union before it was a NATO member first. Okay, it's something that's not really accepted in Washington. But again, given the fact that there's going to be a consensus within the EU member states, I think at least some of them, and it's still the case because it requires unanimity. Some of our partners would say, okay, maybe we are politically fine with Ukraine being member of the European Union, but we need security guarantees for Ukraine. It relates to the EU integration, to the EU membership, and to the reconstruction. So if we are talking about some viable security guarantees, it is NATO. Unless the United States comes up with something very creative, which really is seen in Moscow as deterring. But this bilateral agreement, which is now negotiated under the umbrella of G7, I don't really see it.
Thank you. Ms. Anna Jarosz, please.
I would suggest to focus on concrete elements that will come our way not only in the next week, but also in the next years. I think the first hurdle is to actually get the political agreement to open accession negotiations. Do remember, it's not only unanimity, it's also intergovernmental. So you really need all of the EU member states to decide to embark on this road. Second, the term accession negotiations is misleading. You don't negotiate the union law, you don't negotiate the acquis. This is a process of adaptation, in particular of the candidate country, to the legislative body of the regulation in the EU, but also of what you mentioned before, which is crucial and a precondition, which is both the political criteria, the strength of the institutions, and the economics. I think first we need to get the process started, then we need to get the process organized, and then we need to look what makes most sense from the Ukrainian recovery and growth point of view in terms of making the accession process and the sequencing of the reforms that are driven by that accession process, working for recovery and growth in Ukraine. And that's a little bit the idea behind the proposal of the Ukraine facility, so the financing for Ukraine for the next 4 years, and the Ukraine plan, which is meant to make the recovery and the reconstruction and the enlargement go together. This is something that has to happen in the next years, where Ukraine still depends on external financing. So we really need to be very concrete to see how Ukraine can get its economy going and its state financed before, in my view, we can embark and speculate about bigger and more faraway issues. These are very concrete problems that have to be addressed. Without them, there is no NATO or EU accession. You really have to remember that the state has to get financing for the next foreseeable future, where it will not have access to international financial markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So when we are in this financial discussion, maybe I will move to Jana with the question, where do you see the needs are the biggest when it comes to financing or maybe not only when it comes to financial issues, but when it comes to international support? Where is it most needed?
Well, my answer will be really short: defense. As for now, it's everything. I mean, I'm Ukrainian and I live in Poland, but I've been visiting Ukraine several times, of course, on the regular basis. And defense makes a huge difference. I mean, you can definitely see how business started working, how production was renewed in Kyiv region, which is already protected from the air. But I mean, it really makes a difference. So perhaps this is the most crucial thing. I mean, if there is sufficient supply of weapons, if there is an opportunity to, defend, there will be business, investment, production, and hopefully output growth. Otherwise, it's just a temporary solution, it makes very little sense. I mean, it still makes sense to renew something which was destroyed recently, I'm talking about bridges, public facilities, energy infrastructure, and so on. But in general, it's a kind of a waste of money until you can just finance it and protect it once and for all. You see my point, right? So in the long-term perspective, it generally makes more sense to protect rather than finance reconstruction. So this is my point.
It's a little bit also what Daniel was speaking before about NATO and the EU. So without protection from NATO, the EU is also something that may be not so efficient. But here I would like to move to Daniel about the waning international support that we can see actually on both sides of the Atlantic. So it's not a great story, but the word tired is here on this side. Not Ukrainians are tired, not us, but this support seems to be a little bit waning, both in the US and Europe. So how do you see it?
Okay, so some of these arguments that are floating around, they are legitimate, unfortunately. So when the Americans say that Europe isn't really doing much in terms of its own defense, I'm buying it. Yes, there is a need for the Americans to bridge the gap between now and the moment that we put our house in order. But I get the point that the Americans are trying to make. The same point that comes from Washington, that maybe the Americans would be able to shoulder the military needs for Ukraine, but the civilian needs and the, let's say, and the administrative expenditures should be taken upon by Europe. I'm buying it as well. I think that both military and civilian branches are important. Military, sure, is a priority, but then the civilian needs, so social payments, payments from soldiers, veterans, etc. It all makes into, it builds, I don't want to say resilience, it builds Ukraine morale. They see that it makes sense. If you just finance military spending and forget about the administrative issues in Ukraine, funding the whole state apparatus, I would say that likely we will end up with some sort of war economy in Ukraine, and not everyone would be happy with that. I'm just my guess. But I fear that this would not really be something that the Ukrainians would be fond of. Now, if assuming that some of these arguments are legitimate, I think there is a need to more appeal to the let's say economic side of the assistance, not necessarily the strategic vision. So we usually refer to the fight for rule-based order, international order, etc. It doesn't really appeal to everyone, even in Europe. Not everyone must be idealist. Some say could be hardliner or realists, and they still support Ukraine, because why not? There is a point in that. So maybe using more economic arguments, like why it makes sense to support Ukraine. To what extent the Russian army has been decimated in Ukraine using, for instance, American weapons and American money, without US troops on the Ukrainian soil. To what extent we've been able to withstand the Russian pressure in Europe? To what extent we've been able to build the eastern flank using the money that we have used until that moment? And then you look at the numbers that again come from Washington, and it turns out that 90% of the money stays in the United States. So just 10% really goes to Ukraine. The latest numbers released, I think it was by the DoD or one of the American agencies. So this is something that would appeal to the people to a much greater extent than just saying that we fight for rule-based order, although of course we do. And you look at the opinion polls. For instance, you ask people, do you support the assistance? I mean, continuing assistance to Ukraine. So it's like half-half, I think now in these days. But then you come up with a different question. The second one, say, do you support continuous assistance to Ukraine, having in mind that it costed like, I don't know, 60 billion, so just small percentage of the Department of Defense budget, and now suddenly much more people say, oh yes, sure, if this is so cheap, then why not? The result was really great. So maybe there is a need to come up with more of economic side of this assistance, not only focusing on these grand strategic issues.
Very interesting comments. Thank you. So here, let's move to what we stressed in the report. So when it comes to challenges in terms of institutional reforms. And here I would like to ask Ms. Anna Jarosz-Fries from European Commission. The Commission is fairly satisfied with the progress of Ukraine in these reforms. Where do you think the most effort is needed?
The Commission is satisfied enough in order to recommend the opening of the accession negotiations in relation to the fulfillment of the political Copenhagen criteria. When you look at the enlargement report, you have a very clear homework for Ukraine for the next year in a number of areas. I think when we think institutions is a very broad term, you can relate to continued reform in the judiciary system. You can also relate to the continued reform of or rather strengthening of the anti-corruption institutions. They are functioning very well, but these are new institutions that need to keep on increasing their track record in order to address the systemic issues with corruption in Ukraine. And then you can look across the piece of the enlargement report and look at how many times we talk about the independence of the regulator. And we talk about the energy regulator, we talk about the media regulator. This is really important in the optics of Ukraine being prepared for gradual integration towards the internal market. Ukraine needs to prepare its marketers not only to eventually withstand competitive pressure of the internal market, but also to be able to function as part of the internal market. And before we are in a position to clarify conditions of competition and market contestability in Ukraine, this really goes through the independence of national regulators. Same goes for the Anti-Monopoly Committee, etc. So there's been a tremendous work that Ukraine has done, and this is why the recommendation is very positive towards the opening of accession negotiations. But of course, there is a lot of work going ahead, and again. homework is stressed in various elements in the chapters of the enlargement report. But judiciary, anti-corruption, and regulators. This is how I would sum it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe here I will also move to Jana. What is your assessment of these challenges, and especially when it comes to the efficiency of anti-corruption mechanism in place? So you quoted in the report the surveys that show that it's very incremental for foreign investors tackling these issues, and attracting foreign investments will be it will be salient for the Ukrainian economy. So how do you assess here the situation?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So when it comes to investors, to a great extent, it's about proper signals. So the first thing I would like to note before I forget is that some things which were clearly outlined in the most recent Commission report, so actually the works on them have already started. So for instance, just one of the examples, it was outlined that National Anti-Corruption Bureau, that staff should be increased, and I guess in the beginning of December. So the legislative changes needed for this were already implemented, and it was done relatively fast. So as for now, I can say that Ukrainian government, Ukrainian policymakers, lawmakers, so Ukrainian society in general demonstrates some readiness to implement the reforms which are needed in order to become the part of the European Union. And another thing I'd like to mention regarding corruption, because I'm often asked about corruption being an Ukrainian abroad. Yeah, favorite question. There is a kind of a contradiction between demands for structural and sustainable and radical reforms and anticipation of fast result. Like, I can just bring an example of Anti-Oligarchic Act, which was really controversial. Yeah, so it was like, you need to limit the power of oligarchs. This is one of the main barriers towards Ukrainian EU accession. Okay, we did. No, not in this way. So the legislation which was implemented in Ukraine was implemented in order to provide fast result. However, there are many flaws, and in the long run, they will be even more visible, because what European Commission was keeping in mind was to build such a system which will be sustainable in the long run and will prevent people from becoming oligarchs in general. So it should be depersonalized, it should be effective, it should be resilient, and so on. But it's impossible to do something like this and expect results immediately. So the same thing when it comes to corruption. It's impossible to do it in a right, sustainable, democratic way, and at the same time expect results within half a year or a year. So I would put this as like the key problem, this controversy. Like, on one hand, the reforms should be structural and depersonalized, and implemented in a democratic way. On the other hand, they should act as soon as possible. Like, we need results as soon as possible. So this is one of the issues. And another thing, since I'm allowed to talk about corruption, is that my personal belief is that, this kind of cultural trait should not determine long-run economic fortune. It's subject to change. Like, at some point, there were formal institutions which facilitated development of corruption in Ukraine, but it doesn't mean that, Ukraine is corrupted for now and till the end of the world. Like, it's possible to change using some structural reforms, but again, it will definitely need more time.
Yeah, for sure, and it's a strong statement. Thank you very much, because actually we put it in the long-term challenge, right? So we see that it's not so soon to be done and immediately. But maybe Daniel, can you elaborate as well on this? So tackling corruption and de-oligarchization is also a difficult one when it comes to social mood in Ukraine when it comes to political elite, actually, as well, because some of them might be benefiting from the system, so you need to somehow break it. So it's also a risky way, right? So this is the second part of the story, that you are during the war and you need to reform. So here, how do you see the social mood in Ukraine, because you are an observer from the outside?
Maybe a short appendix. So there is a paradox with corruption. You know, that it's some sort of perpetuum mobile. So you expect Ukraine to fight corruption, which means that in public you have much more corruption cases. But the more corruption cases you have in public, the more political arguments you give to the opponents of Ukraine to say that Ukraine is corrupt. And you're running with the cycle over and over again. And I think the same applies to the oligarchs. Now, in terms of social mood, I think the public opinion is quite clear. So corruption is one of the biggest problems, and there are no contradictions, you know, to fight corruption. Actually, if you look at the opinion polls, the recent opinion polls, that's something interesting, because people say corruption is the second biggest issue after the war, and to make it clear that the people are quite aware what are the challenges ahead, the Ukrainians say that actually corruption is the biggest obstacle on Ukraine's road to the European Union. So not the ongoing war. People say corruption, not the war. Maybe they are more more realist than the Ukrainian political elite. Now, the Ukrainian political elite is a problem, if you ask me, not the society at large, because here I see the problem with fighting corruption, with this state capture, etc. Large part of Ukrainian political elite derive profits from the system, and it didn't really change during the war. Maybe some even amassed bigger amount of money than before. So there is, in my understanding, there is a need for this. I forget how it was framed in Ukraine, but there is a special word in Ukrainian that there is a pressure in parallel, going bottom up from the civil society and top down from the international institutions and partners at the same time. And then you have Ukrainian political elite that have to follow the social mood. You see that after Euromaidan, it's not that before Euromaidan, each and every Ukrainian politician was in favor of EU integration. I mean, the Ukrainian political elite must respond to the needs of the society. This is how it works in the democratic country. So there is a clear demand from the Ukrainian society, and the Ukrainian political elite responded to that. The same goes with corruption. I think that the more pressure comes from the society, the more pressure comes from the international organizations, the smaller room for maneuver for the Ukrainian political class. Sure, there are some skillful players in Ukraine that try to maneuver, try to balance between the war needs and this international assistance. They would try to stress, again, underline that reforms are difficult during wartime, that maybe some reforms could be postponed during wartime because there is a risk that that this ad hoc coalition in the parliament would collapse. But I'm not getting it. So I mean, I don't buy this argument. I think again, both could go hand in hand. War efforts and internal reforms could go hand in hand.
Thank you very much. So now let me move maybe also to the European Union part of the story. So here, Anna, could you describe maybe what areas of disagreement within the EU are on Ukraine accession? From the European Commission perspective, it's always the best to ask, because you gather all the moods between member states, and you know what's the story is there. So here, what could be what could be the areas of disagreement here on this path of Ukraine's accession? And maybe here also we can connect it to to the challenges during the negotiations. So which chapters do you see that might be the most challenging? Of course, we spoke a little bit about these institutional reforms, but maybe you can refer to other as well.
Thank you. I will take some issue with the question. So first, we need a political decision to open accession negotiation. Before we have that, that's not the conversation that we can have. Second, it's useful to remember how the accession negotiations are structured. We open them with the chapters that relate to the rule of law. We don't talk about anything else before we have laid out the ground in terms of how the discussions about the rule of law will look like. And we also check these institutional and legal issues are in place. And this is also the chapters which are closed the last. It's chapters 23 and 24. So that is really useful to keep in mind, that issues related to broadly defined rule of law are incredibly high on the agenda of the negotiations. For the rest, the union law is not negotiable. So, you can talk about which chapters will be difficult for Ukraine rather than for the union. And that, and of them are many, since our acquis has gotten more complex, and our markets, in some elements more demanding. Take the organization of the electricity market, take the emission trading systems or data protection. These are not straightforward legislations to implement in the national systems, and they're not even easy for member states. But I think your question, indicates rather the challenges in terms of the future shape of the union policies, and therefore the discussions about the future union budget, and how the common agriculture policy, how the cohesion policy, or broadly described investment support in the union will look like. These are the two policies on which most of the union budget is spent. That's on the one hand, and on the other hand, how will the European institutions function if you retain the current areas of unanimity with a larger group of member states around the table? So I think these are typically the areas that require a lot of discussion in the union before any enlargement can take place. I think there are massive differences compared to the big wave of enlargement of 2004. For example, things that were sensitive at the time, for example, free movement of workers. I wouldn't expect this to be a problem. At the moment, one of the biggest challenges for Ukraine, it will be to get the temporary people under temporary protection directive in the union back into the country. So demographics is the problem, and there will be a number of labor markets in the current EU member states that would like to keep these people in. So I don't expect difficulties there, and these were at the time of the accession in 2004 of 10 new countries, issues that were sensitive. So I think the market has changed. Ukraine is this wave, whatever it will be defined by Ukraine, and the issues will be different. But first and foremost, we need to get the green light to get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. So I will refer as well to the estimates of costs of accession as well that were mentioned by Deputy Director earlier before. So it's being accounted for 130 between 130 and 190 billion euro, so about 17% of 7-year EU budget. But how do you see in European Commission this issue? Because we are speaking about the cost, but we forget that, for example, when it comes to 2004 accession, these costs, this talk about being a net payer or net beneficiary of the EU budget is not. It's not this simple. It's really more complicated because Western European countries, under different economic estimates, profited from the enlargement process. So do you see in the European Commission as well the need to account for, to estimate the possible benefits of the accession, how to tackle this narrative of the costs? Because it might be too simple and it might be too risky. We see in the case of the US that when we speak about the costs, people are clearly seeing it as an obstacle. So we need to show that it's only a part of the story. Yes, they are the costs, but in the bigger picture, they are minor when we see it differently.
Again, I think that is, first of all, it's a calculation that nobody can make at the moment, because nobody knows what the union budget will look like at the time we will be, concluding the treaty of accession with Ukraine, and figuring out what kind of arrangements to have in terms of Ukraine participating in various policies and contributing to the budget. So making the calculation based on the current policies and the current budget is fairly useless in my view, because we don't even know how the next union budget will look like. What is useful to refer to is maybe two processes. One, there is a process started by the leaders of the union, during the informal European Council in Granada earlier this year, that starts a reflection about the changes that the union should start thinking about to its policies and to its functioning in order to prepare itself for the enlargement. It's always a complex discussion, and it's a discussion which is absolutely necessary. And it's a discussion that shows that the union is very serious about enlargement. If we didn't have this discussion, it would mean that that we are not taking the prospects of the enlargement in the foreseeable future seriously. So that discussion is absolutely necessary. In terms of the Commission has announced that it will come more or less in summer next year with a series of policy papers setting out its view in terms of how the policies could develop in order to respond to various challenges and needs of the future, one of them being enlargement. You would have to watch the Commission proposal for the next multi-annual financial framework, and then a future agreement of the union leaders on it, to have the first view in terms of how the budget of the union preparing for enlargement looks like, and you can structure it in really, really many different ways. That's number one. Number two, in the Commission we don't like the a simplified notions of net beneficiaries and net payers, because it only takes into account a very simple financial flow in and out of the union budget. It doesn't take into account, in particular, the benefits of the internal market. That was, the union has benefited a lot from each enlargement, economically, strategically, geopolitically, and Ukraine, represents, a very interesting value proposition, also in economic terms, in terms of the future economic agenda of the Union. If you think about all the discussion about strategic autonomy and nearshoring, in the context of being able to control better the value chain of what the EU produces and uses, Ukraine is a very attractive potentially location for a number of European investments, which again are and would offer security guarantees that, for example, China can't. Projecting ourselves to the situation where we don't have active war anymore, Ukraine structurally is likely to have cheaper energy than the Union, and that is again a very interesting value proposition for the European industries, in particular those which are energy intensive, especially in still during the time of the green transformation towards climate neutrality. Now, how much you have a lots of there's a critical raw materials that are located in Ukraine, which are also a very needed input in a number of industries, from clean tech to medical, etc., which again, it's very interesting to have as part of the internal market. So Ukraine does present a very interesting value proposition as an addition to the internal market. So of course, these things will also have to be looked at as we move forward in the enlargement process. But that's, as you mentioned, no different from the usual discussion in order to de-link the budgetary discussion, which is just a simple calculation of the financial flows of in and out from the Union programs, to the actual main or one of the main benefits of the EU, which is the largest internal market in the world.
Thank you very much. So I would like to open the floor to questions here, people who are at Pay. But first, I have two quick questions to Jana and Daniel. Yeah, so Anna spoke about investments and chances when it comes to Ukraine's accession. Jana, what are the conditions for the inflow of investments and rapid economic growth during the war? So what can be done here?
Okay, thank you for the question. First of all, I'm not sure whether rapid economic growth is appropriate in this context. Perhaps we should aim for some healthy rate of economic growth, which is possible if we manage to attract sufficient amount of investment from abroad and mobilize domestic investment. But again, I feel like I'm becoming boring. And in this case, defense still remains crucial. It's crucial for investment, it's crucial for production, and according to the research of the Center of Economic Strategy, it's also crucial for making people return from abroad. Like, it's one of the key predispositions. So I'm not sure whether I can add anything except for that.
And actually, you stated in the report that the defense sector is also interesting from the perspective of international investors for cooperation with Ukraine startups, for example, right? So
yeah, like we were forced to become creative, and there is a number of Ukrainian startups. Some of them act as public-private partnerships. So perhaps this will become one of the most, interesting and fast-growing sectors for investment in Ukraine.
Thank you. So please, I don't see the hands now, so I'm asking the question to Daniel about what may be the consequences if there is veto on agreement now to open the negotiations. So what scenario do you see here?
Okay, so I'm gonna share a small story with you. I made up a couple of years ago to explain the state of the EU-Ukraine relations, and I compared the EU-Ukraine relations to the Polish railways. I mean, Edwin Bending didn't make it to the meeting because of the Polish railways. So if you look at the Polish railways, you go to the, you go to the station, and you never know when the train comes. I mean, sometimes it comes a bit earlier, sometimes it comes a bit later, and you have to be there. You have to be prepared. You have to have a ticket. And this is what I told to the Ukrainians. That's the EU integration. The small window would be open at some point, maybe a bit earlier, maybe a bit later on. You have to wait at the station and have the ticket, and the ticket is reformed. So you have to be prepared. The worst option is that the train came and you were not there, or you didn't have the ticket. I think that the same situation is now. So there's this maybe will be a slight disagreement with Mrs. Jarosz-Fries. I know that the political decision is extremely important, but even without this political agreement, political decision now, Ukraine has to be prepared for the integration. So it has to have this ticket and has to wait at the station when this train arrives, and it will arrive sooner or later. I do believe that it will arrive. Whether we will come to the end of the story, so concluding the negotiations, although I don't like the word negotiations as well, but concluding the accession procedure, that's a bit different story. But whether we will open the whole procedure or not, I'm quite convinced that it will happen sooner or later. Now, without, of course, the agreement from Hungary, there is little we can do. I mean, maybe we'll have some, but again, that's a bit different story. Maybe we'll have the funds coming from outside the budget to support Ukrainian needs, but because the enlargement as such is the most member states-driven policy of the European Union, formally, we won't move process forward without the Hungarian approval. But I would, in such a case, I would of course say that we have to be focused on Ukrainian preparedness. So fulfill all the criteria, follow with the reforms, and then wait for this train.
Okay, so I believe that the train have the different drivers, so 27 of them at least. Do we have any questions from the audience? Jan Strzelecki from the Polish Economic Institute.
Maybe I have two questions. Maybe one, I will address the same question which Marek already asked about the possible tensions and competitions between member states of the EU and Ukraine, because Anna Jarosz-Fries already answered this question, but Daniel and Jana, could you maybe elaborate also on this topic? So we have now this process of truck drivers, we have the grain issue with the region of Central Europe, so maybe you can identify any other possible sectors of big competition which cause tensions and disagreements. And the second one is the question about this timetable. You said, Daniel, that this is as a train which can came, and the travel can be long, and maybe you can you also guess how long it will be, because this is also I think that the bad scenario is also we all hope for the Ukraine winning the war, but there's also a scenario that Ukraine wins the war and the negotiations started, but they will be so long and the process will be endless. Like Ukraine will gain nothing for the winning the war. So that's my question.
Yes, if I may a little bit add or rephrase, is there any deadline for this chance of this procedure, not negotiation? So do we see that if it does not happen to this time, it will be very difficult? So maybe in the different order, Daniel first, please.
Agriculture, cohesion policy, budget, and reconstruction as a potential point of contention, because if we really start Ukrainian reconstruction, this will have negative impact on Poland and on other countries in the region. Labor force, maybe companies are relocating from our market to the Ukrainian one, to making projects there, not in Poland. I mean, you have written about it in one of your reports very clearly. So there are several sectors that may trigger some tensions. But again, this is highly politicized process enlargement. So the key point is how to move it forward with approval of our societies. So Chancellor Scholz did not announce Zeitenwende because he changed his mind on Russia. But because that was the demand from the German society when we saw thousands of people on the streets of Berlin. Republicans in the US are not against supporting Ukraine as such, but of course they do have their own problems, sort of with the border and supporting, of course, Ukrainian expenditures. I mean, the civilian expenditures. So that's and because the Republican voters a bit changed their own mind on supporting Ukraine. So politicians react to the demand of the society. So we have to move the EU integration process, having in mind that at the end of the day, the decision will be taken on the basis of the social mood in Europe. So the politicians would react to the social mood, to their voters base in Europe again, in Poland, in France, in Germany. You mentioned again in your report transitional periods, etc. How to diffuse these tensions. So this is one of the options how to make it how to move it forward. The second option was mentioned by Mrs. Jarosz-Friso, appeal to this added value that Ukraine would bring to the European Union in the future. So raw materials, energy, cheap energy, etc. Communication would be extremely important. We had experienced it in Poland with the plumbers case when we were negatively portrayed in different Western capitals. So some of the challenges are the same that we had witnessed in the past. But I would say that the bottom line is, and this is something that Ukrainian political elite must understand. So many problems are not made up. Many problems are not invented. The grain issue, the truckers issue, etc. These were not made up problems. These were real problems that stem from the opening of the EU market. How you handle it politically is, again, different business, but the problem is there. Unless you acknowledge that there's a problem, you cannot really solve the problem. Maybe now we will acknowledge that the problem is there, not only in Poland, but in different Central European countries here in the region, especially in the countries that border Ukraine. If you acknowledge it and if you try to work it out somehow collectively, then I would say that no, you can really diffuse these tensions, but you need political will, of course.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to Jana, I need maybe to disagree on one thing with Daniel, because you say that politicians are looking only at society, but actually, as you quoted in the US, so it's also how we frame questions, how we frame problems. So here the political elites, I believe, have also, they need courage, they need to be bold, to say what's needed and to describe in that way, so to frame the debate in that way that we go, so the public is going also in this direction and not only look at the service, right? Because then we'll not have the policy, we will have only politics. So here I would a little bit put it as a wish for the future that we have both governments, both in Ukraine and in Europe especially. Jana, so the question from Jan.
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, it's such a good question. So I would like to start with one thing. Like before this full-scale invasion started, like there were many arguments from Eurosceptics in Poland that Poland does not produce high value-added products. Like, because Poland is the member of the European Union, Poland is kind of stuck with low value added goods in middle income trap and so on. And it's really funny how after, the full-scale invasion started in Ukraine, probably same people are saying that Ukraine is competing with Poland in the sector of low value added goods. Like, I find it quite ironic. And probably it just illustrates that problem is not really economical, it's rather political. And perhaps there will be some competition, but there is nothing really new I can add about it. It's really old phenomenon. Like, once country is open for international trade, like, low value added sectors are worse off. However, high value added sectors have a chance to gain comparative advantage. So perhaps, if we look at this problem from this perspective, it becomes slightly more optimistic. So I understand that some competition is inevitable. Perhaps it would be wrong to pretend that, no, it's not going to happen, Like, in Ukraine, significant proportion of GDP is produced by agriculture. In Poland, as far as I can recall, around 15% of labor force is employed in agriculture. So some tension is inevitable, but perhaps, it can be treated as some opportunity for Poland to diversify as well. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we are closing, Anna, do you want to answer to react? Oh yes, and the question about that. So three last 1 minute comments, and I give the floor to Konrad.
Thank you. Maybe just to recall, there was a question on timing. Accession is a merit-based process, and the Commission never tires of reminding this. So it's the, other than all the debate that will have to take place in the Union, it's first and foremost driven by the speed of the reforms and the adaptations in the candidate country, and that remains the basis for any calendar. And maybe second, I don't know whether people present in the audience remember, but one of the last elements that was negotiated when Poland was joining the Union was the quota and the transition periods for the soft red seasonal fruit exports from Poland to the internal market, so the raspberries and strawberries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so the timetable, quick reactions. Jana, first.
Like, perhaps the most important thing is certainty. Like, of course, like, according to ideal scenario, accession should happen, and it should happen as soon as possible. So perhaps just to make everyone in the Ukraine happy. But from my perspective, again, this is just my personal opinion, the most important thing is certainty regarding the perspectives of accession. So far, when, there were some conditional help, for instance, or anything like this, it was a really good trigger for political and legislative changes in Ukraine. So I just believe that it should remain a kind of, certain thing with some time limit.
I'm not sure that we can speak about certainty with this train. Daniel?
Just a pure speculation. First, the multi-annual budget to prepare EU for the enlargement, and then the next multi-annual budget to enlarge. That's at least. So I would say 34. It's a no. I will be optimistic. I'm speaking about 2034. Speculation, okay. Pure speculation.
Okay, so thank you very much. From my side, thank you very much to the panelists. Please join me in thanking them, and also online. And I now give the floor to Deputy Director Konrad Szymański.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for all your comments, observations. I think we have a quite rich and quite interesting mix of perspectives. European Commission first, the Polish, let's say, analytical community, two important institutions, analytical institutions, and Ukrainian perspective. I think it's a quite interesting mix of perspectives. we all know that we have a quite long list of question marks, or at least challenges to be addressed during the accession process. It's nothing new. The model and tempo of trade negotiations, trade integration, the budgetary capacities, more and more a sensitive issue, at least in the EU. Cost and benefits of Ukraine accession. It's natural that we can't accept the reduction of economy of any single country to one sector of goods or one sector of services. But on the other hand, it's impossible to imagine that any country will accept the accession process without a certainty and without a good feeling, at least, a rational feeling of security of this process. And of course, in the end, burden sharing and opportunity sharing. It could be represented by the MFF negotiations in the EU, because we used to understand the logic of the EU via the budgetary process. It's indeed, I think, reality check for our intention and for the scenario on the table. But the list is nothing new. We should remember that, of course, there are many different things. The gravity of this process is extraordinary because of geopolitical aspects, and we all know that at this time Russia never been happy with the expansion of the Western organization. That's for sure. But this is the first time when European aspirations of the country are met by barbaric war, the open, full-scale war. So this is something new. But the list of problems isn't anything new. We know the list of the problem for every single accession process, and we have to find a way how to address all of them. In this case, we see extraordinary strategic competition of many powers in the region, and this is of course new, but the rest is something well known. It is why we need extraordinary efforts in strategic communication of the process. First of all, to defend the Ukrainian accession in every single European capital. That's the necessity. And to do it, we have to address, or at least counteract, every single case of targeted disinformation. We already have this experience in the continent, not only in case of Ukraine accession, or sometimes unintentional misunderstanding. It's nothing excluded in this process. We still have a strong, at least I have quite strong impressions coming from the Dutch referendum on association agreement. Much more simple thing, I would say, but with quite complex consequences for Netherlands and for the rest of the EU at that time. I think the think tanks and its international cooperation has a quite important role to play in this strategic communication effort. So I'm very grateful for Center for Economic Strategies in Kiev for this common effort. I hope it is just the first step, not the last one, in our common effort to do something good for public debate and for political decision-making process to get the result we all want to get it, and one day to meet in this or another format to speculate about our common future in the European Union. Well, thank you very much.